Hi, everybody. Welcome to session 8, the final session of this winter 2026 series, Anything But Ordinary, where we've been working our way through some of these stories in the book of Genesis about the patriarchs and the matriarchs, the miscreants and the swindlers.
We're moving into Joseph, further into Joseph's story, and we do pop over a few chapters that I'm going to talk about, not at any length, but we're just going to note where we head through before we get to the final story that's actually in the lectionary. So we know that Joseph was sold to traders by his brothers, and he ends up in Egypt in the service of one Potiphar, who's the captain of the guard. He's in a prestigious and wealthy position, and he's in charge of the security of the royal household. And Potiphar's household is indeed wealthy. He has servants, he has lands, he has agricultural fields, and Joseph becomes his personal attendant and puts him in charge of the entire household. And that means all of those things I've just said, his servants, lands, agricultural fields, etc. There is a subplot that concerns Joseph and Potiphar's wife and results in Joseph being imprisoned, and the lectionary skips over this. We'll come back to that story. But the chief jailer happens to like Joseph and puts him in charge of all the other prisoners. Joseph seems to be rather charismatic and can talk his way into these positions, presumably. And in the prison is Pharaoh's butler and baker, who both have dreams, and Joseph interprets them. Joseph gains a reputation as a dream interpreter, and then that is Pharaoh hears about it. Pharaoh has dreams, Joseph interprets them, and that leads to Joseph having the position that he is in when his brothers come to Egypt to beg for grain because there's a famine. So they come twice, pleading for grain, both in Genesis 42 and 43, and on neither visit do they actually recognise Joseph as someone that they might know. Again, the lectionary jumps over those encounters, but we want to ask a question about this, particularly this last one. And why did the brothers not recognise Joseph as one of their own, do you think? Rather, they see him as an Egyptian. Why don't they see him as one of their own race, for instance? And what does that tell us today about putting people in ethnic boxes? So this is the first question that we want you to think about. Do you want to do this in small groups or the big group?
Yeah, big group. I've got a question. How many years has it been since Joseph was taken away?
We don't know.
Because it could have been several years, and they probably presumed he was dead, and he was dressed like an Egyptian.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think the dress like an Egyptian they wouldn't have looked at him closely.
Yeah, I think they just wouldn't have expected to see him.
Yeah, I think he would have been dressed like an Egyptian.
Yes, I think he probably was. What about seeing someone as ethnically the same as them? Do you think the Egyptian dress changes that? Yeah. Or do you think there's enough similarities between where they come from and the Egyptians that it's not distinguishable?
They'd be pretty similar, wouldn't they? Especially colour-wise.
Yeah.
I think it must have been a very long time that if he was a teenager when he was sold into slavery, and then it was the time he was with Potiphar for some years, and then he was in jail for some years, and then he ended up with the Egyptian in the palace.
Well, we don't know how long he was in any of those positions. It doesn't tell us.
At one point it says he's 30 years old.
Yeah. Okay.
There was
probably very well dressed.
There were 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. So you can count that as 14 if you like, although bearing in mind in the Bible, 7 and 40 are,
Magic numbers.
are numerical terms that are used to mean a fair bit of time and then a heaps long bit of time. You know?
Yeah. More than recognise him as a brother, I mean, my question is, I guess, why don't they recognise his ethnicity?
I think they wouldn't have looked closely at him.
Okay.
Well, they probably had their face on the floor. So.
Would it be similar to when in some, I can't remember where in the Bible it says that God closed their eyes to recognize something? You know, that do you think God had a work in it, that he was deliberately making Joseph seem like the Egyptian rather than their relation?
Given the
Betty was
detail in
dripping
this
with gold.
story, I would say probably not, because I think it'd tell you if God was deliberately masking that. I'm going to tell you I'm going to make this a very short story. It wasn't when I read it. It's about a guy who goes to the Middle East, and he's actually doing some investigations with Israelis and Palestinians about how they view one another. And when he's with the Palestinians say to him, "Be careful when you go to Israel because you look like a Palestinian." And when he was with the Jews in Israel, they said to him, "Be careful when you go to Palestine because you look like a Jew." That is a true story. I'm summarising a true story. And I'm going to suggest something like that may be happening here.
I think our expectations are driven by the context.
Just come closer.
I
Hang
was
on a minute. Bill first, then you, Katie. Go, Bill.
I was just saying that our expectations are driven by the context.
Yes.
So the context would have been a royal, like an important Egyptian household and government officials. And so I think we probably do the same sort of thing, don't we? We see people in a certain environment and make all sorts of assumptions about who they are.
I think that's exactly right, Bill. Katie, what were you going to add to that?
Well, I went on an Aboriginal retreat. I'm not Aboriginal, but I have members in my family. And there were a number of Aboriginal women who looked very Aboriginal, tried on these robes that one of them had brought back from the Middle East. So you really only saw the top of their heads, and they all look Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
So that's why I thought if the outfit covered quite a bit, all his hair and part of his face.
Probably didn't cover his face, but certainly probably would have covered his hair. But I think Bill's nailed it. I think that context dictates what we think we see, whether it's quite right or not quite right, or whether indeed between the Semitic races, the true differences between characteristics of them are so small that even their nearest and dearest are not able to pick them. And I think that is worth considering how we make assumptions today and how we decide things today. Do we look at a certain person's skin colour and context and make an assumption about them or their religion or what they're wearing, for example? There seems to be a lot of that going on in our society. I'm not saying anyone here is doing that, but there is certain assumptions made. I think about if people are brown or if they wear a certain kind of clothing or they're in a certain kind of context.
Or if they look like Father Christmas.
Sorry?
Or if they look like Father Christmas.
Exactly. That's right. They'd probably assume he was from the North Pole and kept reindeers. So, yes. So, Joseph and his master's wife. We're going to touch on Potiphar's wife. And the reason we're touching on Potiphar's wife is one, the lectionary leaves it out. And two, I have found a translation issue.
Oh, really?
And it's a really good one. So we're going to cover it. And it's going to be in With Love to the World that I'm writing for when it comes out, but it's not out yet. So, Potiphar's wife. Like many women in the patriarchal story, she doesn't have a name. But her presence and in the interaction she has with Joseph, they're quite crucial to the story because that puts him in jail where he can interpret the dreams, which leads him to Pharaoh, which leads him to his position of power. So it's all kind of part of the chain. So in the traditional understanding of this story, how do we see Joseph, people? How do we view Joseph in this story?
The victim.
The victim, yes? Anything else? Well, I'm going to throw in morally upright because the tendency is to see Joseph as victim, innocent, morally upright, and Potiphar's wife as some sort of seductress and siren. And it's a common trope we find about women in the Bible, sometimes rightly, often wrongly. So the narrator has said once Joseph took charge of Potiphar's estate. The blessing of the Lord was on all he had in house and field. And then later, after Joseph has interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, the narrator reports Pharaoh said to Joseph, God has shown you all of this. There is no one so discerning and wise as you. So Joseph is set up as this very blessed person for his faithful service. But I'm going to pose the question, is Joseph really completely upright and morally pure? Is he the complete victim here? It is true, Potiphar's wife certainly does approach Joseph and she persists with her advances. But when Joseph goes into the house in Genesis 39:11, and it's translated in most Bibles something like to do his work, the phrase is actually ambiguous. It can equally be translated as to satisfy his desires. Is that not a juicy translation issue?
Yes.
Yes, with thanks to the ancient rabbis for that one, I found that one. And the meaning was certainly known to them because they try and explain it and they soften it. They come up, as they often do, with what I would call fanfic. That is, there's a backstory, and they find supernatural reasons for Joseph to desist and flee temptation. And remember, when he flees, she is holding his garment. He's close enough to her. She can actually clutch his garment and hang on to it when he has to slip it and run. So they variously speculate that Joseph saw an image of his mother or his father. One rabbi said he saw both. And then one rabbi said he saw God himself threatening to crush him with a rock should he proceed, which would be a deterrent, I would think, in anyone's book. So in their minds, the rabbis' minds that is, Joseph was going into the house for a dalliance with the wife of his master. And this rabbinic view crashes somewhat with Christian ideas of the morally perfect Joseph, a sinful seductress, and they see divine interference and some sort of vision as necessary to prevent Joseph's sin. I think the rabbinic view of the text is more grounded in reality, reflecting that life isn't necessarily black and white, and we aren't necessarily stereotypical tropes of either goodness or sinfulness. We tend to have them mixed together. And that desire or temptation happens to many, many people. And the question is how you handle it, not whether it's there to begin with. So we've got some questions for you. Now you've got this very exciting new way of looking at the story. How does this interpretation change the way you understand this story? Do you agree that Potiphar's wife, or do you think Potiphar's wife has been misrepresented? Do you think Joseph is not quite as morally upright as we have been led to believe? And I'm going to pop you in your breakout rooms for this one, just a quick discussion. Okay, how did you go with this question about Joseph and his morals?
I had a question of how she managed to get hold of his garment. You generally don't get hold of a person's garment just by taking it, ripping it off them. It would have to be ripped if she was strong enough. So how did his garment get into her hand?
Oh, well, it was already off, right? Okay.
Good thinking, Dorothea. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the garment's a bit incriminating, I think, just a tad.
Well, I think he was a slave, so he was damned whatever he did.
Well, that's quite possible, but that's not quite the question I was asking here. He probably was, but
We had a couple of interpretations in our group. My point I was trying to probably unsuccessfully make was that there's not much point to the story if we're trying to put this ambiguity into his character. Surely the point of the story was to create this myth of a person who is of great moral character and rightness. And his rejection of the overtures of Potiphar's wife was there to reinforce that point of view, surely.
well, we need him in jail. So how he gets himself into jail, I'm not sure that it really matters. I take your point, what you're saying, but I don't want to discount the rabbis in this translation because I think it does put a different spin on the story, because a lot of the heroes that God uses are deeply flawed from our point of view.
Yeah.
I think Joseph needs a few flaws. He hasn't shown many to date, so it's time he grew one.
Mm.
Oh, it was very aggravating.
It would have been a lovely bit of midrash discussion, wouldn't it, to
Yeah.
the rabbis? It was exactly the sort of thing that you've raised would have been part of their...
That's right. I think that's right, Bill. It's the sort of thing they get their teeth into. And I don't know any of them. Well, some of them have clearly come to some conclusion because they're positing what's happening. Now, whether or not he felt the desire or not, I think the main game is that he didn't proceed with it. It still lands him in jail, though. And maybe she is bitter and twisted because she got that close and then he did the dirty because God's about to crush him with a rock or whatever the rabbis think he saw. And out he runs out of the house. And so that makes her doubly angry. I don't know. The whole thing is speculation, but I think it makes the story much more interesting personally. That's just my feeling. So, yes, any other questions or opinions?
Well, our group agreed with that too, Elizabeth, and to make the story more exciting.
Make it a bit more exciting if Joseph has to actually get that close and then suddenly have to pull himself up and run away. I think it does. It actually gives you this exciting climactic point, pardon the pun, where or the double entendre perhaps, where he actually has to say, no, wait, what am I doing? And run away. So yeah.
But the translators haven't given that interpretation, have they?
The translators frequently don't give that interpretation, Bill, because they're a pack of Christian do-goods who want to harmonise the actual tradition. And I'm not saying that because I'm bitter and twisted about them. I might be. But I'm saying that because they do that. And there's far less morally ambiguous translations that they just get flat out wrong.
Absolutely.
And they do it on purpose. And, Matthew's earthquake is in the stilling of the storm is my prime example where they want to read the same as the other two Gospels. It's uniformly translated as a great windstorm rises on the lake. That is not what Matthew says. He says there was a great earthquake. They are not the same thing. They're quite different Greek words. And that you will never find that translated accurately. And it's because translators want it to read across what the tradition believes about that story. That Luke and Mark agree with each other and they want Matthew to agree with it too. And that's how they translate it. And that bugs the hell out of me because that is not what Matthew's saying. So I think that translators choosing one thing over another is not necessarily an indication of rightness. Let me put it that way.
Well, I mean, one thing to consider is that most translations, apart from ones like J.B. Phillips or Eugene Phillips, Eugene Peterson or so on, but most translations are made by committees.
Yeah.
And you know the old story about a committee and a horse and a camel. And so committees always come to some kind of compromise. And I suppose the other factor to bear in mind with translations is that the people, present company accepted, the people across the church that are more committed to the biblical text and to having the text look right have a more conservative theological orientation. So I think, most translation committees do way more conservative than progressive or liberal.
Yeah.
And so both of those factors, the fact that it's a debate which leads to a compromise decision, and it's probably slightly weighted more conservative. Some translations are heavily weighted conservative. Some translations these days make a real effort to have progressive and conservative, to have male and female, etc., represented, but that wasn't always the case. So there are perhaps a number of factors at work amongst the translators cohort.
Yeah.
It may be changing a little bit today, but
yeah. Well, even with things like the NRSV updated version that claims to be a formal correspondence, that is, it's translating word for word, it does not. It still has Matthew as a windstorm. We still have Jesus straightly charging people. He's not snorting like a horse, which is what he actually does when he sends the blind man away. It says Jesus, having snorted like a horse, sent him on his way. You will not find that translated anywhere, but the Greek word clearly means, it's embryomai, if you're wondering what it is. It clearly says snorted like a horse. It's a thing magicians do. So it's changed to commanded or ordered, straightly charged in King James. You will never read, I guarantee you, snorted like a horse in any of your biblical translations. But that's what it says. So there you are. Translators do this all the time.
Take that.
Was it because it sounded like magic?
Yes.
Is that
is why.
Yeah.
And it's a concept that's foreign to us in the 20th and 21st century when these translations were made. We don't get the idea of Jesus snorting like a horse, and we'd probably get offended by it, but that is what the Greek says. Anyway, I shall leave this. I'll get off my soapbox and we shall move forward into life in Egypt.
Never heard you say any of that before. Jeez.
Life in Egypt.
Psalm 105 is one of the psalms, one of the so-called historical psalms that tells part of the story. There's a number of this one includes a reference to the time when Israel came to Egypt and Jacob, that is the people of Israel, lived as an alien in the land of Ham, which is of course another way of describing Egypt, going back to
Noah.
The psalmist says that in this time the Lord made his people very fruitful, which presumably reflects the time after the severe famine of Genesis 43 in the story that we're reading. That's the point at which, after all kinds of machinations have happened, Jacob and his family, the brothers, they recognize him, they recognize Joseph, and Jacob and his family relocate to Egypt. And Joseph reveals his true identity to the family and settles his father and brother and grants them a holding in the land of Egypt, which is what we read in chapter 47 of Genesis, in the best part of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had instructed. And Genesis 47 also says that Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food according to the number of their dependents. So that was all very good. Of course, soon after this, famine hits Egypt as well. And Joseph has a scheme for surviving the famine, which works, so the country survives. Israel settled in the land of Egypt in the region of Goshen. They gained possessions in it. They were fruitful. They multiplied exceedingly. Genesis 47, verse 27. And that is said also in the beginning of Exodus, which says that the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied, they grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. So Egypt actually ends up as a good place for quite some time for the Israelites. And the estimate is that it's about 400 years, which is another one of those, of course, those biblical figures, 400 being a heaps long time.
Yeah.
But so we're talking about many generations of Israelites as they become known, Jacob, the descendants of Jacob, many generations of the descendants of Jacob living in Egypt, and it being a good time, a good place. And then, of course, as the psalmist says, the Lord made the people fruitful, made them stronger than their foes, by which they mean the Egyptians, whose hearts he then turned to hate his people, to deal craftily with his servants, which of course is a summary of the first part of Exodus, when the Egyptians seem to have enslaved the Israelites, and life was filled with bitterness and hurt and despair, and that's what leads to the Exodus. So Egypt becomes, rather than a symbol of a land of plenty and of good and of good life, it becomes a symbol of negativity. Anyway, that's jumping ahead. We just thought it was worth noting that kind of contrast in the symbolism that's there in the stories, bearing in mind also that Exodus is a long time after Genesis. So we're still back in Genesis when Egypt is the promised land, so to speak, not promised by God, but it offers promise to the people through what Joseph is offering them, and they do have a good life there. Now we come to the story in Genesis 45. The brothers have been in Egypt before, but they didn't ever recognize Joseph. But in chapter 45, there is a breakthrough. Joseph reveals his true identity to his brothers. So we've got a series of questions here, because not only does Joseph reveal his identity, but he puts his brothers through several tests when they came to see if they were worth feeding, I suppose. A couple of questions here, which we'll let you ponder in your groups about this part of the story. When the brothers finally stood before Joseph in Egypt, without knowing who he was, how did their past actions come back to haunt them, do you think? And so that's in terms of the brothers and what's happening to them in the story. And then Joseph putting his brothers through the testing. Was Joseph acting out of a desire for revenge, or was he testing to see if their character had truly changed? So there's two perspectives, two angles on this story that we thought you may wish to talk about in the groups.
Okay, how did you go with those stories?
How do we know that their past actions haunted them?
Yeah, we
Or
don't.
didn't I read the text properly?
No, it's a question.
Okay.
Well, how did their past actions come back to haunt them? Well, I suppose their lives flashed before their eyes when they realised who they were actually talking to. Well, if I was one of those brothers, my life had flashed before my eyes when I realised I was standing before the brother that I wanted murdered, and he now had all the power.
Well, I mean, I think the psychology, kind of projecting the psychology, if you have been terribly mean to somebody, remove them from your life, so you speak, so you think, and then decades later you find yourself in a powerless position, and them in front of you in a great position of power. That's when the idea, I think, of the past actions coming back to haunt.
It's a great story, isn't it?
Yes, it is actually. It's a really good story that we've got here in Genesis.
It's an incredible story. Well, it was told for 1,000 years. It was honed for 1,000 years before it was written down. So
how much of it's original is?
Well, that's right. I mean, it may well have started with some person in Egypt called Joseph that obviously had some power. Egypt was a mighty big empire, so it's quite possible. But if you're going to tell it for 1,000 years, it's probably going to take a few twists and turns on the way.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I think that I think I'm right in this, that in the Egyptian histories, the Israelites aren't really there at all.
No, they're not. They aren't. That's part of the problem with the Exodus story, because there's nothing in the Egyptian records. And the Egyptians were like Nazi Germany. They recorded everything.
Oh, really?
They absolutely did.
Okay.
And that's why I think you'll find Exodus is so vague. It starts off in the time of a pharaoh who was building stuff. It doesn't tell you which pharaoh or which era or what he was building. It gives this vague kind of reference that could apply to anyone who was a pharaoh, which should make you all suspicious.
Well, there's probably elements of a truthful narrative. They were important to the Israelites, but not very important to the Egyptians.
There is an Egyptian record that say that 2 Hebrew slaves escaped, or 2 slaves with a word that's like, it could be related to Hebrew. Not 200,000.
Actually, did the Jews believe this? Is it this in their Talmud or in their writings? Is this story in their writings, the Jews?
Their all stories are. This is their Bible. We stole it. The Old Testament is the Hebrew Bible.
So they would believe this or not?
Absolutely.
As true?
Maybe.
Oh, okay.
Some would, especially if they're trying to annex their neighbouring countries. They'll claim this proves that Israel was a certain size. Most probably would not see it as a literal thing, more as a metaphor or as something that was passed down and changed over time. The Jews are far more pragmatic about this stuff than we are as Christians.
Oh, okay.
But the whole Exodus story and the things that preceded are fundamental to their understanding of their
Covenant.
The covenant and the relationship with God, and delivered
That's
them.
absolutely right. Yeah, it is.
So it's not sort of like a fictional story for them. It's really one of the key components of their understanding of their story, their own history.
Yeah. Though there's no evidence for it. That is the big problem. There is not a particle of evidence to support the Exodus story. Nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. It's zilch. And that's part of the issue. And some have posited it's actually a metaphor for the story of exile and returning from exile in their current situation. And the Exodus story was told as a metaphor for that story.
That might be a stretch, do you think?
Necessarily, because you've got to think like an ancient person. And if they're writing under occupation, how they might do that.
But if they're grabbing all these oral traditions, they would have existed in some form. Some wasn't sort of created out of nothing, surely.
Yeah, that's...
Perhaps. We don't know, because as I said, there's no evidence for it at all. Nothing.
Apart from the oral traditions.
Well, we don't know what they were. We don't have them. All we've got is what's written down in the Jewish Hebrew Bible, which is our Old Testament.
Yeah, but don't the scholars sort of identify the various components of oral tradition in the text?
They identify 4 different writers, and there's obviously Southern and Northern Kingdom versions, but it's very hard to identify an oral tradition unless something's told a number of times. Like the story of Abraham passing Sarah off as his sister is told 3 times if you want to count Isaac doing it as well. It's exactly the same story. That's considered oral tradition because it repeats itself that way.
It's just a way of saying how beautiful the lady was.
Yes. But it's
Okay.
also a trope to say how powerful that Abraham was as well.
Right.
Yeah. And was he powerful? Well, he was probably wealthy as far as the nomadic herdsmen go.
Yeah.
Was he powerful? Probably not. Not compared to a pharaoh or an Assyrian king or a Persian overlord.
All right, well, we'll come to the actual moment of revelation and what the narrator does there. The narrator tells us that Joseph reveals his identities to his brothers in a narrative that's really fraught with emotion. It starts off in chapter 45. Joseph could no longer control himself in verse 1. He weeps loudly. His brothers are dumbstruck and dismayed. This is all very emotive kind of language being used here. Joseph gives a lengthy speech of explanation, then he bursts into tears, and then Benjamin bursts into tears, and then Joseph, we are told, kissed all his brothers and wept upon them. So this is a deep-seated, visceral set of emotions happening here. The physical actions signal the profound effect that the experience of reconciliation is having on Joseph and his brothers. Now, one of the places that we looked at was the Jewish website Chabad.org, which discusses the comment that Joseph fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck, which is kind of strange idiom in English. The website says these chapters of Genesis tell no mere family drama. That is to say, this is not just about these blokes. The 12 sons of Jacob are the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Their deeds and experiences, their conflicts and reconciliations, their separations and reunions sketch many a defining line in the blueprint of Jewish history. The website quotes rabbis who see greater significance in this story than just an intra-family reconciliation. In the Talmud, it is noted that, so the Talmud, a 5th, 6th century document in which the biblical texts are discussed and interpreted and reinterpreted. So one part of the Talmud, it is claimed that the temple on Mount Zion is the neck of the world because the temple is the means by which God relates to God's creation. So it is where God's breath goes in to the body, which is all of the creation. And it is through the neck, the temple, that God imbues the world with spiritual perception and material sustenance. So the rabbinic midrashic interpretation sees deep significance in the comments about Joseph and Benjamin each falling on each other's neck. It's about the temple, it's about God and relationship to Israel, but not just Israel, God's relationship to the world. So that becomes the story becomes a great global kind of parable, if you like, not just about brothers sorting it out, but about God relating to the world. Well, we might take a more down-to-earth approach and just see it as the repairing of human relationships that have been broken, forgiving past deeds, setting out on a new future. Because Joseph ultimately chooses to forgive his brothers and tells them that God used their evil actions for a greater good. So the questions that we offer you now are, how is true forgiveness different from just pretending a hurt never happened? And what can we learn from Joseph about letting go of bitterness?
I might have added a third question to that, is if Joseph wasn't in the position of power, would he have taken the stand that he does take?
Well, you're too late. We talked about this the other day. And
I know. I just thought of it. Anyway, I'll throw that one into the mix.
Okay.
Does that
All right.
make a difference? Because he is the one in the position of
Well,
power.
yes,
Is it easier to forgive from a position of power? I don't know.
That's right.
Anyway. And Bill, you asked a question about could they really have an extended metaphor? After listening to John, the answer is yes. Yes, they can, the rabbis. Okay, how did you go with that set of questions? There you go, off you go.
I just said it would be a far different story if he hadn't have shown true forgiveness, wouldn't it? You know,
It would have. Absolutely.
Wouldn't it have been a totally different story?
He did, yeah. And as Peter said, you know, he actually showed mercy to them. You know, there was true forgiveness. We believed in our little.
Yes, we thought so, didn't we, group?
I think we thought there was a bit of grey between those two. True forgiveness and pretending a hurt never happened. There's a whole lot of grey between those extremes. It's not quite, it's more nuanced than that in terms of lived experience.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Well, Amanda had some good comments about can still maintain the hurt that comes with, you know, or being hurt by something or somebody, but being able to forgive and hold on to, like, that's a true forgiveness, but we still are injured by the hurt.
Yeah, that's right. You can hold both. You can forgive and not forget, I suppose the saying is, and you can be genuinely pleased, like he is, to see someone, but still remember.
It's still there. It doesn't. The hurt doesn't disappear. What caused the hurt? The act that caused the hurt, it doesn't just disappear. When you forgive, you're forgiven. It's still there, and its effect is still there.
Yeah. I think that's the lived experience of most people who have been undergone some trauma or abuse, that is their lived experience, Peter. And if they move to a position of forgiveness, it's not because they've forgotten.
No.
Or that they don't still feel that there was a hurt involved in that. And sometimes it's so terrible, people just can't forgive.
I think what we
and you can't condemn them for that.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
We concluded, Elizabeth, that maybe for some people it's the only way they can live with the rest of their life. They can forgive, because if your life is being ripped apart by the anguish of the hurt, if you have to survive, then maybe you have to learn how to forgive.
Yeah.
Dorothy made a point that he would have had to work through the issues to get to that point, I guess. Would have taken it some time through working through the process of getting there. That was a point made by Dorothy, which I thought was...
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And it doesn't mention anywhere that his dreams have come, the dreams he had as a boy have come to fruition, though that's very clear from the text. They've come to fruition. I mean, is he feeling secretly triumphant about that? Who knows?
Yeah.
Midrash, that one, couldn't we?
Well, you could. And I'm sure if I looked it up, Bill, the rabbis have. There'll be something, because they seem to write about all of these nuances because it fascinates them. What actually, I mean, in some ways, they were the first kind of deconstructionist psychologists. They wanted to pull apart the stories and say, why did they do this? Even with Potiphar's wife, a whole lot of them posit things about Potiphar. You know, some say he was a eunuch, some say he was always busy and never around his wife, always off fighting battles or in the Pharaoh's court or attending to things, so she never saw him. They come up with all these reasons why she would want to seduce Joseph. So
Right.
it seems to be their stock in trade doing what, as I said, I call it fanfic. It's like Star Trek fans have always written
Oh,
backstories.
okay,
that,
right.
You think it adds authenticity to the stories?
They do in some ways, because it
Mm.
also contextualizes for those rabbis' cultures. They can work in those contextual issues and they can talk about that. And that seems to help them a lot to do that. But yeah. All right, we're going to move on then. The irony of the stories about Joseph is that Israel as a whole is identified with reference to Joseph at many places in the Hebrew scriptures. The narrative texts and the prophets, and we've heard in the Psalms, we get places that refer to the
House of
whole
Joseph.
nation as the house of Joseph. So that's in Joshua, Judges, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, Amos, Obadiah, and Zechariah. And we hear of the Psalms, in the Psalms, they sing of the descendants of Jacob and Joseph and bring their petitions to God. And Shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock, in Psalm 80. And Psalm 81 places Joseph alongside Jacob and Israel. It is a statute for Israel, an ordinance of the God of Jacob. He made it a decree in Joseph. So that's in Psalm 81. So the name of Joseph was clearly revered among the ongoing writers of the traditions of Israel. These seem to be suggestions that do suggest that maybe some of the detail of these chapters in Genesis means that they come from an historical person, and that Joseph may have actually been such a person along with some of the patriarchs that existed in time doing something that brought him to prominence in Egypt. And in contrast to the patriarchs and matriarchs before him, who are offered as characters in a narrative developed before and during the exile as a foundational story, as Bill said, it's the grounding kind of mythology of how Israel became a nation. His ultimate character is one of redeeming goodness. He's rather different, because we have people like David and Jonathan killing every close male relative to make sure there's no challenges to the kingship, for example. We have all the sneakiness of Jacob and other characters there, or deception that Abraham does, and he's the one who takes his son up a mountain to sacrifice him. Joseph is astonishingly good when we compare him to the rest of these stories, in contrast to the schemers and deceivers who have gone before him, and I would say to the murderers and people who wanted to cement their positions of power, who indeed came after him. So our question here is what do you make of this interpretation? In what ways does this add weight to the suggestion Joseph has more certainty as an historical figure than those who go before him? Does it provide that certainty, or does it not? So we might answer that in the big group, I think, because we want to just have you do a wrap up. So there's the questions up on the screen, or they were. Okay. So what do you make of this interpretation? And does it add weight to the historicity of these stories or not, do you think?
There's something in the story itself that is just it's such a emotionally, powerfully told story that gets at your heartstrings, that it's either with Joseph himself or the story itself or the story that they created over 1,000 or so years. But there's a deep kind of truth in the story, which kind of gives Joseph a bit of authority to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is told that way, Peter. I think that's a good point. It is it's much more emotional in some ways than some of the later stories that we have.
Mm.
Got a lot
And as you said last week, this occupies a third of the story, the book of Genesis.
Mm. Yeah, that's right. The interesting thing is Joseph doesn't lend his name to a tribe, despite all this fame and his goodness. It's his sons that lend their names to the tribes of Israel, not Joseph himself, which I find a curiosity. I don't know quite what the answer is to that.
Well, his name goes to the house, not to the tribes.
Well, that's true.
The overarching house. And
But
it's his
didn't
two
Joseph
sons
stay in
there.
Egypt?
Well,
With his-
presumably, yes, he did. Because they have to bring his bones back. When they leave in Exodus, they bring the bones of Joseph.
Right. Okay.
Mm.
It could have been written by Anafunder. And
Who's sorry?
it could have been written by, is it Anne Funder or Anafunder? You know, the author. No?
I don't know.
My wife knows Anafunder. Oh, yeah. I recognise her as a modern
love her
author.
books, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just a modern story.
Yeah, it's like a modern story.
Yeah.
But,
It is actually. Joseph behaves in some ways in a modern way, in inverted commas. That is, he's not sneaky or deceptive, if you can forgive him teasing his brothers a bit initially before he identifies himself. And he does forgive them. He doesn't chop their heads off, which David or Solomon would have done.
less bloodthirsty.
Yes,
Yeah.
much less bloodthirsty.
There's never been a movie about him, has there?
Oh, I think you'll find there was a lot of more older ones, Cecil B. DeMille type ones. There might be, there's some about Joseph. Because most of these big biblical stories have been made into movies. It's just they're quite old now. And of course, he got made into a musical, the Technicolor Coat.
Yeah.
Of course,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yes. But he's an interesting character because clearly he's very famous. There's only one other king who is described as the house of Israel, or one other sort of ruling type, and that's Omri, who was from the northern kingdom, and he gets short shrift in the biblical text because he's northern and it's written by southern kingdom people.
Oh, right.
Omri, Israel was called the house of Omri for centuries by people like the Assyrians and the Persians. It was always referred to as the house of Omri. You would never know that from reading the text, which is severely truncated.
So is there any way of finding out from which tribe this story of Joseph was written in? Like, it's definitely got a point of view, you know?
Really? I mean, that's lost in the mists of time because the Hebrew Bible is so ancient. It could have come from anywhere. I don't know what kingdom it would have come from. And it may be that both kingdoms had versions of it, because both kingdoms had versions of creation, the flood story, the Noah story. There's different versions exist of those stories from each of the northern and southern kingdoms.
But those different versions are both included
Yes,
in
they
the
are.
text, and there's no alternate narrative
No.
from Genesis 37 onwards. It's or 31
Right.
onwards.
Yeah.
So it's one kind of cohesive narrative that makes sense in and of itself. You can't pick it apart looking for inconsistencies like you can do
In
with
itself
Noah,
makes it
yeah.
historically dubious in some ways. The fact that it's so well written and it is contiguous. Yes. And there isn't different versions, but anyway. All right. We should move on to our conclusion, I think, which is just us asking you, what have you learnt from discussing the narrative about patriarchs and matriarchs that run through Genesis? And has this encouraged or challenged your discipleship? Perhaps it's done both. Who knows?
Certainly challenging. Learning all those trickery and all those bits and pieces, deceiving and all those things that went with it and all those things that went on. Yeah.
Yes. It's a very different world, isn't it, Bev?
Yes.
You've encouraged me to pick up the Red Tent again. I started reading it, so now I've started again. So
oh, well done.
Read it, loved it.
It's a good novel,
Reading
actually.
Maxine?
The Red Tent.
Oh, okay, right.
It's worth reading. When she finishes reading it, Bev, borrow it off her.
Okay, right, I will. Thanks.
Quite a good read.
Interesting. When I see all these stories of, and not, I mean, they're central to the Hebrew people, and to the Jews, but they're sort of peripheral to our faith and our understanding of our journey, I think.
In many ways, they are. Yeah.
And yet, it is interesting to go back and sort of pick them apart and to see how all these things have started. What was the beginnings of these great traditions?
We pull a lot of stuff from Genesis, particularly for our Sunday school and scripture. Who did not learn about Noah, for example, in Sunday school? Who didn't learn about Joseph and his coat of many colours in Sunday school?
They're horrific stories to tell children, some of these.
Yeah, that's right.
They work. Yeah.
But they remember them.
They do. They remember some edited, sanitised version in all probability. It's like the story of Samson, another favourite for Sunday school. Samson saved Israel. It's just in Sunday school they don't tell you what a dreadful man he was, and he was dreadful, awful. He did awful things all through Judges.
It doesn't seem to matter, does it? The truth doesn't seem to matter.
Well, no, and it does bother me a little because Samson is a murderer, an arsonist, and he carries on with the Philistine woman, which is his ultimate downfall. He's just not a nice person at all.
He's a hero at Sunday school.
He's a hero at Sunday school because of one action he did. But anyway, I digress. We'll come back to Genesis because he's in Judges. So
I think what is interesting is that for our generation, these stories form a cultural backdrop to our understanding of the church and Christianity. But the people we want to speak to who are outside that tradition, they don't have this backdrop at all. They haven't been to Sunday school. They don't have. So when the language we use and the stories we tell are a mystery. And I think we need to find a new way, perhaps having a conversation with people who are outside our Christian traditions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Bill. And all the research into churches and society, looking at society and their view of churches, would reinforce what you've just said, that these stories aren't particularly important. The only figure who is important to people who are not church, commenting on the church, is that of Jesus. And they all know Jesus. They don't necessarily know these other stories and these characters and heroes. But it is in our Bible. This is one of the things that you've probably heard me say before. It is in our Bible. In fact, it forms 60% of our Bible, the Old Testament. And the Torah is a huge chunk of that 60%. And where you'll hear of where if you've come up through Sunday school and in the church, you'll know these narratives and these heroes and that. You probably know very little about Leviticus or Numbers. Yeah. They tend to be seen as books, oh, well, we're not interested in them. That's all superseded. Where we know the Exodus story, we don't know the details well, but we know it and we know these characters and we probably know bits of Deuteronomy, like Moses never quite made it into the promised land, but Joshua did. But we tend to have a gap in our knowledge. So we've got this large chunk of our Bible or our Old Testament and we know a lot about this much of it. And we probably know a fair bit about the prophets, some of the prophets, and we use the Psalms in different ways, but it's quite selective, the material that we learn. So I guess part of this is expanding your knowledge about what's actually in your Bible and what they're really doing. And it's not what Sunday school said they were doing. Because mostly it's nothing good.
Very right.
You know, there's some very clever teachers in the Sunday school era, 20th century, putting music to stories, like we're climbing Jacob's ladder. You know, most kids would associate a lot of songs with the stories, and it's the songs that stick. It's not the stories, it's the songs. Whether they're accurate or not is quite another thing. Of course they're not.
Right.
But that's what sticks.
Yeah.
Well, they could have left Leviticus out of the Bible, I reckon.
Leviticus is a fascinating book, Maxine.
Is
Bite
it?
your tongue.
People love quoting that.
I do like saying that. It's true. I used to challenge my first years at UTC when I was teaching there, because I'd say we're doing Leviticus next week, and there'd be universal groans across the room, and I'll say by the end of next week you'll be eating your words and you will find this riveting. I always won that, always. By the end of it, they were riveted.
Or the next study, maybe.
You think I should tackle Leviticus? I keep telling John we should do a series on the books, the bits of the Bible you will never hear unless we teach them to you. Series.
Sounds like a perfect one for next year, folks.
And
I'd like that. That sounds good, Elizabeth.
John and I have discussed putting something together along those lines, because there's a few texts that I like Jephthah's daughter, you all know that one, that you will never hear in the lectionary, but there's others too, like the prophetess Huldah or the witch of Endor. You'll never hear them preached on or talked about. There's a number that lurk. Or even the Levite's concubine. You may have heard of her because the Levite is somewhat infamous. You should know about her.
Yeah, well, you did one on women at one stage, didn't you? That was excellent.
I did. Yeah, it would be picking up some of those themes and having a look at it. But Leviticus is one of those texts where if you look at it through a social scientific lens and have a look at not so much as what it says, but why they believe that, it becomes a lot more interesting. And some detective work is required. Why did they think the way they think? Why have all these food laws, for example?
Why would they eat the carcass of a dead animal? That's, like, I mean, yeah, we do as meat, but it sounds like it's any old thing that dies.
Well, if it's dead,
Well, there were no health authorities and no health regulations and no government.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
Were the regulations?
It hasn't been bled properly, Maxine. It's as simple. The answer is as simple as that. So if your cow dies of natural causes, it hasn't been killed in the correct manner, and it's not kosher. That's all that means.
Oh, okay.
It's probably pragmatic too, though, isn't it? Like the grounding a lot of these rules and regulations and laws is pragmatic because it's about safety and health and
It's like I've had a job with a number of students who tell me that, and they're wrong. And so are you. Sorry. It's simply because, did anyone know about health and hygiene back in those days? Honestly, think about it. No, they didn't. They had no concept of microbes or anything like that. They did know if they left out a carcass long enough, it would go bad and that milk would go bad. They knew things like that. But like the Romans, for instance, ate pigs with impunity, without managing to die of it. They ate shellfish with impunity without dying of it, as did the Greeks and the Phoenicians. So the question is, these races all around them and who conquered them are eating these things. Why aren't they? That is the real question.
Okay.
That's next study.
Next
Right.
time.
That's what you need to, you have to think like a detective. So ask why, not what.
it'll be riveting because you've nailed our shoes to the floor, I think.
So we could think
head
of
to a
you.
coffee table, aka Monty Python. So that's got to be better.
Elizabeth, we can think of you as Miss Marple.
And with Leviticus.
or Vera.
Bit tame.
Yes.
Big time. We need something better than that.
Yeah. Leviticus is a detective story. It's about, as I said, it's about asking why have they written this down and why do they want to do this? And to answer that question, you've got to look at what their context is, who's around them, and what are they doing. There you are, challenge. You're all going to run and read Leviticus now, and you'll have to think about it. All right.
Okay, I've got to go.
Elizabeth and John,
I'm going to
can I
bed.
just
Yeah.
thank you so much for
you.
running this series. It's been fantastic, and I know that those who are here from Tuck at least, who come to the Bible study, then come on Sunday and they go, "Oh, I wonder how Amanda's going to tackle this one." And it's been a really, really great adventure. So thank you so much on behalf of everyone here and Tuggeranong, and let's do Leviticus next year, shall we?
Leviticus and.
We've got a date.
I don't think I'm up for a whole series on Leviticus, but we can certainly cover
That's
it.
okay.
Leviticus
Let's do the buffet of stories we don't get to hear because they're not in the lecture.
Yes, it'd be lovely.
Yeah.
A biblical buffet.
A biblical buffet. I like it.
Yes. I mean, the Bible's a pretty big set of books when you think about it. The lectionary can't cover everything, so it does have to leave a lot out. I mean, just pragmatically, it does.